Welcome to Democracy Talk, the short interview series for the forthcoming Virtual Global Roundtable organised by the International Association of Constitutional Law on Democracy 2020, assessing constitutional decay, breakdown and renewal worldwide. It's happening on the 18th to the 26th of November, 9 webinars across 5 days. Now, I was delighted to sit down on the 5th of November with 3 speakers from webinar 8, which is happening on the 25th of November. And that webinar will provide a focus on constitutional democracy in Poland and Hungary. I was particularly interested to hear about the background to the ongoing protests that are happening in Poland right now. So I'm delighted to have with me Professor Piotr Mikuli, who is the chair in comparative constitutional law in Jagiellonian University in Poland, Associate Professor Agnieszka Bienka-Sawa, who is from the Faculty of Law and Administration in Nicolaus Copernicus University in Torun, Poland, and Professor Timea Drinozzi, who is from the Faculty of Law in the University of Pécs in Hungary. You're all very welcome.
Thank you very much, Tom.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you for having us.
So I'm really delighted to have gotten all 3 of you here to have a very quick, short 10-minute interview about what's happening in Poland. And I'm going to direct one question to each of you in turn. So Agnieszka, I'm going to start with you. You know, the world has been watching as Poland has experienced the biggest protests in decades in opposition to the restriction of reproductive rights. But this isn't just about abortion. In the webinar, you'll be talking about how illiberal constitutionalism is slipping into authoritarianism in Poland, especially since the COVID pandemic hit. So I'm interested in, can you quickly explain what's happened this year leading up to the protests that are taking place right now?
Exactly, Tom. The protest is not just about abortion, but it is about human dignity, rights and freedoms, about certain vision of the world and value orientation. These issues have led us to illiberal constitutionalism and are leading Poland towards authoritarianism. Fortunately, there is a non-partisan and nationwide opposition that now decided to be loud in its liberal demands. Obviously, Polish democracy has been decaying since the 2015 elections. We have witnessed gradual capture of Constitutional Tribunal, the National Council of Judiciary, the Supreme Court and other constitutional institutions. Remodeling of judiciary is never-ending saga. The rule of law achievements have been devastated. LGBTQI+ people become a public enemy. This situation developed before the COVID pandemic hit the country in March 2020. Since then, the ruling political force has introduced an almost full lockdown, forced a ban on assemblies during the presidential election campaign, manipulated the electoral law for political gain, suppressed LGBTQI+ people rights, and now women's rights too. The ruling party used the captured Constitutional Tribunal for illiberalization of human and women rights on the 22nd of October this year. In my opinion, the year 2020 is dominated by 2 main issues. The first one is pandemic related, while the second has a more general importance. The COVID-19 pandemic found Poland in the middle of presidential campaign, so almost all measures were calculated for political gain instead of securing health and saving lives. Such a situation seems to be repetitive. Summer witnessed personal changes within the government, and now the Constitutional Tribunal was activated. The Peace Party used the Constitutional Tribunal for increasing political support for their long demand reform on abortion, and perhaps most importantly, cover the real situation, that is lack of preparedness of the state in fighting the pandemic. But people are aware of this and they are against the new abortion situation. The second issue, more general, is inability to engage in dialogue, deliberation, and discussion to achieve a reasonable consensus that could be widely accepted and maintained. When those in power lack such abilities and fail to do their job, in this case, protect people from the pandemic and respect their liberties, people go to the streets and protest. This is what we see almost in every city in Poland at the moment.
Thank you so much, Agnieszka. And you show that there is such a full background to these protests, and there is a lot that's fueling the anger that's being expressed in the protests. You mentioned that this has been happening since before this year, since this government came into power in 2015. So I'm going to turn to Piotr, and Piotr, there's of course this much broader background that goes far beyond this year. So you're focused on how the parliament has become a mere facade in Poland. So what do you mean by that?
Thank you, Tom. The notion facade, I refer to the situation in which a state body, an organ, is deprived of its constitutional competences in a substantial material sense. It is connected, of course, with a lack of necessary independence of this organ from other organs, bodies, or from the ruling party. This is inherently connected with the concept of political capture, about which Agnieszka has said. And this concept is discussed in the academia. However, not only courts and purely legal bodies are captured by authoritarians, but also pure political state organs, which constitute the very essence of democracy, like the parliament. According to this authoritarian idea, in case of Poland, the parliament, likewise the constitutional tribunal, or also to some extent now the Supreme Court, must be ready to rubber stamp decisions which have already been made by the ruling party, I mean, the Law and Justice, Jarosław Kaczyński and his alliance. We have to remember, however, that this institutional capture is quite specific, as such a captured organ, from a formal perspective, may be quite effective, primarily if it uses its competences in a way hostile to the constitution. In this sense, the parliament is ready to make statutes which is not in conformity with the constitution, and the constitutional tribunal is ready to show its judicial activism. And ruling politics may use such captured organs just as they want. The recent events show that if for political reasons the parliamentary majority is not ready to take responsibility for a certain decision, it may happen, for instance, that the other captured body, like the tribunal, has to take over this formal responsibility, as it happened in the last abortion case. And in turn, if the outcomes of such decision turn out to be, for some reasons, unwelcome, because we observe now the strong resilience concerning the last abortion decision, thousands of people hit the street, we may come to a situation where politicians consider whether publish or not such the judgment, because the judgment, in order to be effective, must be published in the official gazette. So they ready to publish this judgment, even if it is this judgment was issued by their own constitutional court, puppet court. But coming back to parliamentarism, because I'm going to speak about this during the webinar, we can observe that the Polish parliament is a facade, especially the first chamber, the same as the opposition's role is completely downgraded. During the webinar, I will try to refer to the examples of muzzling opposition MPs, such as imposing financial punishments, limiting their time to speak, to make official MP statements, or rejecting by the first chamber the Senate's amendments to statutes just because they were prepared by the politician opponents.
So this is a huge problem in terms of the functioning of Polish democracy. And of course, turning to Timea, Hungary, of course, started traveling this path before Poland. So what resonances do you see with the Polish context, especially as regards the impact the Orbán government has had on women?
Thank you, Tom. Indeed, even if we know that there are crucial differences between Hungary and Poland, we can see that they are going down a similar road that definitely takes them closer and closer to authoritarianism. They might follow their own path, and it is true that the deterioration in Hungary started in 2010 and that Poland joined this journey in 2015. It does not alter at least three factors beyond the probable end result I have just mentioned. These factors, as Agnieszka and I see them in our research on illiberal constitutionalism, are these. Populist autocrats lead these countries. They have a special vision on the components of constitutional democracy, the rule of law, democracy, and human rights. And they also have a special vision on how society should be organized, most preferably along with conservative, Christian, and paternalistic values. And our societies, according to value research studies, are not averse to these values at all, which are unfortunately accompanied by exclusion. And this exclusion includes the position of women and their rights and opportunities. We cannot really say that the Hungarian governments before 2010 were pioneers for women's equality. We just have to look at the composition of representative bodies and higher judicial positions, the glass ceiling in almost every profession, and the pay gap on the national level, caused by a series of mostly structural reasons. Of course, the EU accession meant a kind of motivation from improvement. Now, as for the position in state bodies, the Orbán government has handled this issue similarly to other matters. It created a facade by, for instance, appointing female ministers and state secretaries. They, however, similarly to their male colleagues, do not have real power to influence policymaking, as this is not the idea of this regime. And at the same time, acts of misogyny are far from being an unusual behavior of male politicians. And this is one of the most devastating impacts of the Orbán government on. The lack of respect has led to a lack of consideration, which led to a not paying proper attention to the possibility of an increased number of domestic violence at the beginning of the pandemic. It also has led to the firm conviction among politicians that we have a well-functioning victim protection system when life and NGOs show otherwise. It has also led to the refusal of the ratification of the Istanbul Convention, which tries to combat, as we know, against the violence against women and domestic violence. And Hungary, along with Poland and Belarus from Europe, signed the Geneva Consensus Declaration, which is an anti-abortion petition. On the other hand, and it might illustrate how the regime in Hungary works, the Minister for Families, Ms. Novak, was quick to confirm that the government does not plan to amend the abortion law, which has so far been considered as a law which adequately balances pro-life and pro-choice consideration.
Thank you so much, Timmy, and thank you, Agnieszka and Piotr, also for these really illuminating insights into both the Polish and the Hungarian contexts. So important, and really looking forward to the discussion in webinar 8 on the 25th of November. But for now, just a very sincere thank you to all three of you.